Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Design Futures Forum 2023. Thank you for joining us today on a bright and maybe a bit grey Monday morning. My name is Dawn Lim. I am the Executive Director of the Design Singapore Council. We are also the organizer of the Singapore Design Week and today's Design Futures Forum. In case you haven't really been in the know so far, today marks day 5 since we opened Singapore Design Week to the public last Thursday. And I hope you've had the chance to experience some of the installations that we've put out around the Bras Basah Bugis district, the Fine Design Fair at Marina Bay, as well as some of the programs and events at the Orchard Design District. If you haven't, you've got a couple more days. We run until the 1st of October this coming Sunday. And through all these programs, the Council is hoping to showcase what Singapore design stands for, always seeking to make lives better through design. And to that end, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the Design Singapore Council. And so we've adopted the Council's motto, Better by Design, also for this year's Singapore Design Week's festival theme. And that's 20 years, 2 decades of us trying to infuse design into every aspect of how we live, learn, work, and play as a nation. Design Singapore Council is Singapore's national agency for design. And over the last 2 decades, we've observed how the ecosystem has changed and evolved with the nation's needs. But we're also at a critical juncture now as we look to the future. There are new questions for us to ponder. What lies ahead? And how do we shape that future, given that it's volatile and uncertain? What is the role of design in shaping that future? As chief of the council, I always ask my team, how might we make the future better by design? And I really believe that Singapore is uniquely positioned to respond to that question. We are a city that's known to be forward-looking, futuristic, and future-ready. This city is where we spent almost 60 years prototyping that future, using design, innovation to overcome our challenges and look for new ways of doing things. It's also why HBO featured Singapore in Westworld Season 3 about the future. It's also why Netflix featured Singapore in their latest docu-series, Live to 100, Secrets of the Blue Zone. We stand for something. We stand for something about the future, and the world is looking at us to see how we move forward. And perhaps as testimony to the relevance of these topics, I'm really excited to share that we have fully subscribed, a full house today, so thank you all for securing that golden ticket, like Willy Wonka and the chocolate bar. So we had a long wait list, so you're the lucky ones that managed to get a seat today. Now, with this incredible cast of thought leaders that we've brought in, Singapore and internationally, we're going to focus on 3 key areas today: sustainability, emerging technology, and systems of care. Now, why these 3 areas? And I hope it's rather clear to all of you here that these 3 trends are the major driving forces for humanity, the planet that we inhabit, and our collective future. But it's also 3 critical areas that are core to Singapore's national agenda as we contemplate our future as a nation, island, city-state. So let me just give you a quick rundown of what you're going to expect for the rest of today. We're going to kick off the first segment on the theme of sustainability and hear from some of our experts on solutions on zero material waste flows, decarbonisation, behavioural nudges to help us do better sustainability across different sectors. After lunch, we will move to emerging technology. Now, we believe that design will create and shape meaningful, immersive digital experiences and interactions going forward. And so our speakers will talk about their visions, different visions of that digital future. What are the technologies that are central to that? And how we might interface with those technologies and those digital futures. Last but not least, to wrap us up, today, the shifting demographic changes across societies. Even in Singapore, we can see that. It means that design has a critical role to play when we think about the future of care, the future of health, the physiological and mental health challenges that we will face as societies, as a nation, will change and are already shifting. And we will need to address this at a wider systemic level. And so our final forum segment, will ponder a future of care that is diverse, inclusive, and takes into account different cultural contexts. Now, at the heart of it all, the Design Singapore Council, we believe in organizing this forum that design has a pivotal role to play in shaping that future, shaping the future that we want, in fostering innovation and creating a positive impact for all. And I believe all of you share that same aspiration. That's why you're here with us today. So I thank you for choosing to spend your Monday with us. And I wish you an insightful, inquisitive, and an inspirational day with us. Now, with no further ado, we're going to kickstart our first segment of sustainability. Allow me to give a quick introduction of our moderator for this segment. She is Joelle Chen, Head of Sustainability Asia at Lendlease. Joelle leads the implementation of Lendlease's sustainability strategy in Asia, using technical capabilities, organizational best practices, and external partnerships to deliver its Mission Zero and social value targets. Now, she is a trained architect, although she tells me she's a recovering architect. And she draws on 20 years of experience in stakeholder engagement and ecosystem development in the sustainable built environment. She was also the first Asia-Pacific head for the World Green Building Council, spearheading net zero carbon and healthier buildings in the region. Joelle, the stage is yours.
Hello. Woo.
We practiced this morning.
We practiced. Welcome, everyone, to our session, our segment 1, Design for the Future of Sustainability. I hope everyone's excited. Raise your hands. Woohoo! Are we going to do the Design Week dance? Dawn showed us the Design Week dance last week. The word sustainability can be fairly polarizing. Some people are very enthused by it, like myself. Finally, it has reached mainstream. Others, perhaps less so. With the complexity surrounding the topic and greenwashing on the rise, it runs the risk of being difficult to define and measure, inaccessible, or worse, feelings of being dissociated or taking away from the important work that needs to happen in all countries, in all sectors, and in all communities. Our session today is titled Designing for Sustainable Futures, with the assertion that design can contribute to finding solutions to solve our climate crisis. And I truly believe in this. You know, as a recovering architect, someone who's design trained, we believe that we need systems change to drive solutions for climate change. We need to rethink from bigger, faster, more, to perhaps smaller, slower, and enough. We are almost at fever pitch. You know, the UN chief said recently we are in the era of global boiling. But we do not need to function at internet pace, right? And I have 2 quotes that I want to leave with you. One from Adrienne Marie Brown. She's an activist. Her quote starts with, "We are shaping the future we long for and have not yet experienced." I believe that we are in a battle for the imagination. And the second quote is by Margaret Mead, an American cultural anthropologist. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." I believe that we, the design community, with your creativity, capacity to identify issues, and aptitude to rally people behind a vision, have the unique opportunity to make a difference in our world today through design. And I'd like to set the scene for our session today, you know, by proposing a different way of thinking about sustainability. It's not new, but it's worth repeating, and it's the donut. I hope you all had breakfast, because otherwise this picture will make you very hungry. But a donut is not the sweet pastry that I'm referring to, but a concept to rethink our linear, consumption-driven, growth-obsessed society. And donut economics is a concept developed by an economist called Kate Raworth, a simple yet powerful way to think about our economy and its embedded relationship with the planet. So imagine that donut, that lovely sweet pastry that we saw earlier, with the inner ring representing basic needs of people: food, water, healthcare, education, housing, and that represents the social foundation by which people can live with dignity and that no one is falling short on life's essentials. And the outer ring, the planetary boundaries that protects Earth's life-supporting systems. And that includes boundaries like climate change, like loss of biodiversity, and different types of pollution that we experience today. And between these two rings lies the safe space which humanity can thrive, both ecologically safe and socially just. And the challenge we have today is this: how might we make this happen at the individual mindset and behaviors level, and at a systems level, and at scale? And as the saying goes, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. How might designers here, support the redistribution of knowledge, of ideas, of resources, so that we all might have enough? We have an inspiring lineup of speakers today. While all coming from design backgrounds, they bring a diversity of ideas and leverages to effect systems change. I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Mr. Shigeru Ban, CEO of Shigeru Ban Architects. Mr. Ban probably needs no introduction for many of us in the audience, but here goes anyway. He founded his firm in 1985 and became a consultant to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in 1995. In that same year, he established the Voluntary Architects Network, an NGO to support disaster relief. Mr. Ban was one of the distinguished thinkers and practitioners selected as an ambassador for the new European Bauhaus Roundtable in 2021, and currently a special guest professor at Shibara Institute of Technology, Japan. He's also variously known as a gentle revolutionary, an ecological architect, and an innovator. And if you have any questions that might pop up in your mind during the course of his presentation, and you'd like to ask him during the Q&A later on, you can submit the question via Pigeonhole, and the QR code is right here. You can access Pigeonhole here, so you are ready for all the questions. Now, please join me in welcoming Mr. Shigeru Ban.
I started working in disaster area because I was very disappointed with my own profession as an architect. Because I knew we are not working for society, but we are working for privileged people who has power and money. Because power and money is invisible, they hire us to make a monument to show their power to the people. I'm not saying that I'm not interested in designing monument, but I wanted to use my knowledge and experiences not only for privileged, but also general public, even people who lost their houses by disasters. I graduated from a school called Cooper Union in New York. Then I came back to Tokyo immediately after without any experiences as an architect. So what I did is designing exhibitions. This is the first exhibition I designed for my favorite architect, Alvar Aalto from Finland. Because I've been to Finland many times and I wanted to show this exhibition like his architecture or his interior design. But I have a very limited budget. He used a lot of natural material, including wood, but I couldn't afford wood, and also I didn't want to use such a precious material for temporary use. So I was looking for material to replace wood. Then I found out paper tube made of recycled paper, which was all over my studio. When we finished tracing paper, when I sketched, we end up with a paper tube, And also the fax paper used to be the roll paper and always paper tube there. Because I hate to throw things away, I kept them. So this exhibition, the seating design like Alberto's Be Please library with small paper tube, and larger paper tube was used for the freestanding partition. Next, please. Then I found out this material is very strong. I started testing to use for the structure. Year 2000, when I started developing paper tube structure in 80s, nobody talked about environment or ecological thinking. But the year 2000, world start talking about environmental issues. This is the World Expo held city of Hanover in Germany. The main theme was about environmental issue. So because I was the only architect using recyclable material for building, I was chosen by government to make a Japanese government pavilion. And I was very lucky to collaborate genius German architect Fry Otto to develop this idea further. This is locally available paper tube in Germany. As a part of the contract with this contractor, they had to promise us they're going to collect all the paper tube after building demolished to recycle. I didn't want to use the concrete foundation because concrete is difficult material to recycle. This is a wooden box filled with sand instead of concrete foundation. And all the connections is just fabric tapes. Now we go to disaster areas. These two photos are taken, that's the Rwanda refugees. 1994, there was the genocide in Rwanda. Two tribes, Hutu and Tutsi, fight each other, made 2 million people as refugees. And I was very surprised to see such a poor shelter created by United Nations. People are freezing during the rain seasons because this shelter was not good enough to keep them warm. So I thought that we have to improve the shelter, otherwise any medical care doesn't help them. So I wrote a letter to United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva, but there was no reply. So I had to go there without any appointment. And I was very lucky to meet a German architect who was responsible for the shelter construction. And he accepted my proposal of making shelter out of paper tube because of following reason. This is a typical shelter made by United Nations. Refugees have to cut the tree by themselves to put the plastic sheet given by United Nations. Over 2 million people cut the trees, so this used to be the forest, but all the trees are gone. They go much further to cut more trees, so that the United Nations start providing them aluminum pipes. But aluminum is a very expensive material locally. Refugees sold them out for money, and they cut the trees, more trees again. So that the providing aluminum pipe didn't solve the problem. So that's what timing I proposed my idea using recycled paper for the shelter. So I start working for United Nations. Next, please. This is a 3 prototype I made with support with a company called Vitra in Switzerland. This is a BillionBricks camp, and we built the paper tube shelter. Year after, 1995, in city of Kobe, Japan, we had a big earthquake, over 8,000 people killed, and I found out there's many Vietnamese refugees in Kobe. They are staying like this in the park with a blue sheet. And although they are gathering at the Catholic Church, all the Catholic Church was totally destroyed. And I proposed to the priest, why don't we rebuild the temporary church out of paper? But he didn't trust me at all, making the building out of paper after the fire. But I didn't give up. So every Sunday, I commuted this church from Tokyo, and I got to know the Vietnamese people. They invited me here, and they are suffering with the condition. In the fine days, inside temperature go over 40. In the rainy day, inside floor become totally wet. And how also that also government start building temporary housing, but Kobe is a very dense city. All the housing was built outside of the city. Those Vietnam people has a job, only particular area and particular factory. So if they move out from the city, they cannot commute. So that they wanted to keep living in this park, although this is such a poor condition. However, Japanese neighbor people try to kick them out because they are afraid this big park becoming like a slum. So I thought that because they have no choice to move. So I thought we have to provide them something more comfortable, more prettier and healthier. So I brought my Japanese student to build with shelter with paper tube, in plastic beer crates. If I use concrete, then nobody think it's temporary. Then the priest trusted me to build a temporary church out of paper tube. I got a 10 meter by 50 meter rectangular site, and the student put paper tube oval shape, which come from one of my favorite church in Rome, designed by Bernini. This is the photo taken first time they are having morning service under the roof, and they thought they can use only for a few years, but it was there for 10 years because this became a symbol of the city of reconstruction. And it's not only religious service; they also held a wedding, and the concert, and the meeting, and the movies. So this became kind of the community center of this particular community. So they were there 10 years. Then after 10 years, they decided to rebuild a more permanent building, and I was very lucky to design. Also, there was a big earthquake in Taiwan. We decided to disassemble to donate this church to Taiwan. So this is now current situation in Puili, small village in Taiwan, which became the permanent church and community center. It's still there, of course. And then I wonder, what is the definition of the permanent structure? What is the definition of the temporary structure? You can see in Singapore, or Tokyo, or New York, in any big city, there's many concrete buildings disappear maybe in 20 years. Other developers buy the land, destroy existing building to put new one. So that even building made in concrete can be very temporary if building was made to make money. But even the building made by students with paper can be permanent as long as the people love it. That's my definition, what is temporary and what is permanent. This is the last project in Ukraine. As you can see, after Russia invaded February 2024, immediately after, there are many refugees to Poland. So this is a typical refugee evacuation facility in gymnasium. As you can see, there are no privacy. So I work with my friend in Poland, architects, to build the paper partitions. This is my voluntary architects network, and all the curtain and paper tube was donated from local manufacturers, and now they got this partition, and we built in Poland, Ukraine, Slovakia, Berlin, and Paris. This is the last slide. As I said, I was asked to design the hospital of 25,000 square meters in Libya, because the most of injured military people, even citizens, come to Libya because it's rather safe, but so they are over capacity. And also that Libya, in Ukraine, they have a CLT factory. CLT is the cross-laminated timber. It's laminated wood used to export to Canada and US, but now they cannot export. So Mayor asked me to design the hospital, totally locally available laminated timber, CLT. So this is a project I'm very busy now. And so I like to keep building the building to be loved by people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Van. Please remain on stage while we have our question and answer. And thank you so much, everyone, for sending in your questions via the pigeonhole. A lot of exciting questions. We have, I think the clock is upon us, so I'll quickly go through the questions. I wanted to start with, there were quite a few questions talking about your main source of inspiration. We see a huge range of typology, different types of projects, of course, very varied clients and different materials that you use, not just paper tubes. What was really your main source of inspiration as you design?
First of all, as you can see, those developments started in the 80s, when nobody is talking about environment, and nobody uses a word like sustainability. Still, I don't know what is really sustainability. I just started using material around us, existing material, and existing technology. Paper tube was not invented myself. Even this styrofoam system was not invented myself. I use existing material, existing technology to find the new applications. So that if you want to invent something new, now you need a lot big company with big money to invent something new. But still, even individual people like myself can do something, invent with existing material and existing technology, but just finding new application. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, and one of the questions exactly to that, right? You know, when you are finding new ways of applying these existing materials, there were obviously barriers to applying these in whichever context. And you know, that Ukraine example you brought up was the perfect example. What happens if you face those kind of opposition? Clearly, you know, not all regulations are accepting of all the new materials that you propose.
You know, after I got the permission from the Japanese government, because Japan, we saw the regulation is very strict, permission to make building out of paper, I got really the confidence that I can prove anything as long as logically it's true. I can prove by testing. So that the most difficult thing to make something innovative is prejudice of the people. But otherwise, we can prove by testing. Then I have a confidence. It's no problem to do anything new, but as long as it's logically true, logically right, and by testing, we can do anything new.
So taking your mind back to, you know, in the 80s and the 90s when you first started designing in paper tube housing, and we see quite a few questions here about the material itself. How did you make sure that it was stable, it was strong, it was waterproof, fireproof, etc.? It clearly went through a lot of testing. Yes. Could you describe, you know, what went through in those moments, just to paint a picture for our audience?
As I said, people have the prejudice paper is weak for water and fire, but it's not true because it's industrial material. We can make fireproof and waterproof. Even many of the concrete building you see everywhere, the round post, it's made of the paper tube foam. We put wet concrete inside the paper tube. So that it's much worse conditions than exposing the rain. So it's a totally waterproof paper tube. So I just use existing material and the proof by testing, but it's nothing difficult. Because it's an industrial material. It's more difficult to make the building out of bamboo. Because natural material like bamboo, different diameter, wall thickness is different, and also by the sun exposure, it cracks very easily. That's why only the country which doesn't have a strict regulation like Indonesia or Colombia, they have still the bamboo building. But it's very difficult to apply. As you said, all the size is different. But now I'm working with a Chinese company to make a laminated bamboo. So we can control the quality and the strength and everything, so that you can see the flooring made in bamboo. It's the same technology applying for the building.
So you think, you know, a follow-up to that question, do you think paper tubes might work in Singapore with our humidity?
No problem.
There you go, guys. Please design a building in paper tube.
But the most challenging thing is you have to, but Singapore is a very tough country because I made a pavilion for the Biennale some 8 years ago. And it's made in paper tube. It's information center. Yeah. And they allow us to use a paper tube, but not wood. It's more difficult to get permission to use wood than paper tube here in Singapore. That was very unusual. So I had to make a joint out of steel. It was more expensive, but the paper tube permission was easier than permission in wood.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. We have a question here. What is your dream future project, Mr. Ban? Something that you've not.
As I said, I don't know what green means. I don't know what sustainable means. I just do whatever I like to do without wasting material. Yeah. As you said, in the 80s, nobody think about this ecological thing, so that I just didn't want to waste material. So I don't know what this green means because it's too popular and too commercial.
How about your dream project? What do you want to build next?
Well, my dream project, I have been losing for competition. I hope to design wineries because I love wine. That's my dream project.
Which type of wine?
I love the Bourgogne wine, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. But any country, even Singapore make wine?
No? Sorry.
But that's my dream project.
Thank you. I'm going to read out one a couple of questions here. There's one question that's quite curious. I'm curious how you blur the lines between permanent architecture versus temporary architecture, and love to hear your opinion about that.
Well, it's clearly I explained.
Yeah.
The building love the people can stay longer, and many building to make money is temporary. So it's not depending on the material. It's not depending on who made. It's just whether building are loved by people or not. So that's the only definition.
Thank you. I think we have probably time for one last question. Are we good? All right. One question from, and this is the only person with her name here, Anna Sajena. Do you consider design for disassembly and onward reuse of your building? I know you talked about recycling, and many of your buildings have actually been used in multiple places, but is it integral in your design process in terms of the reuse of your building? Do you expect your material supplier to take their materials back?
I use the paper, wood, bamboo, and anything available, but I love all the material, even concrete. Each material has a different characteristic, different purposes, so that I try to find the most appropriate way of mixing the materials, so that if building tend to be recycled or tend to be moved even, I choose the material which can be easily disassembled and reassembled again. When even some of the paper tube are meant to be permanent, and then I make the joint in wood. But making joint in wood is not reusable, because when we bolt and when we remove the bolt, we cannot use the same hole anymore. So when I make the paper chip building, it has to be removed to somewhere else, I make a steel joint which can be used again and again. So depending on the project, I use different material appropriately.
Thank you. I'm going to sneak in one very, very last question, because I know you have to leave. If, imagine if a 20-year-old Shigeru Ban was sitting in the audience today, what advice would you give him?
Travel. Travel all over the world to see different culture, different people. That's most important education for young people. Not only for architects, for any profession, traveling is most important education for young people. And
learning from the rest of the world and learning from different cultures.
Yes. Unless you make other people happier, then your country cannot be happy.
Yeah. Words of wisdom. Thank you so much. So Mr. Ban has got to rush off for his flight, so we are so pleased that he's able to make time for us this morning. I'll now like to introduce to you our next speaker for this segment, Wendy Chua. Wendy is an interdisciplinary design researcher, curator, as well as educator. Her practice, Forest and Will, co-founded with Gustas Maggio, envisages design as an agent for change to create an impact in social and environmental care. As a design anthropologist swimming between the fields of marine science, environmental humanities, and design, she is currently exploring how we might model art, science, climate inquiry to make sense of the coastal threats of marine heat wave and harmful algae blooms. Put your hands together and welcome Wendy on the stage.
Thank you, Joelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy, so I run the design practice Forest and Will. That, as Joelle has mentioned, we see design as an agent of change for social and environmental care. So for the last weeks, I've been wondering how did I end up on this stage, especially with luminary speakers like Shigeru Ban, whom I've only previously met in my design textbook as a student. But then I remember the words of eminent social scientist and philosopher Bruno Latour, who said that the notions of globe and global thinking include the immense danger of unifying too quickly what first needs to be composed. And it is only when humans see pollution falling back on them that they begin really to feel that the Earth is in fact round. So Latour was warning against seeing only the global perspective of climate change. And in truth, the global view of climate crisis can be very paralyzing. The problem seems too big, and we are too small as individuals and as a nation. And so we need to land, in Latour's words, and situate ourselves on the local site, surrounding ourselves with the feedback loops in order to see the repercussions of our actions. And that's basically what's the purpose of me standing here today, to localize the state of climate crisis in Singapore through a few local stories. So there's no better way to land than in the hawker centers. During the pandemic, food deliveries became the new normal, and we've never looked back since. And to understand and localize this plastic waste problem of our tapao culture, we started hanging out with hawkers.
我叫阿华，我做这行差不多45年了。我们是从路边搬过来，我就帮我父亲做，15岁做到现在60岁了。就说你的 old cup， 以前的年代，我的父亲没有教我，是我自学的。慢慢冲，慢慢冲，冲不好我就倒掉，冲不好我就倒掉，不好喝嘛，没有那个 standard 嘛。像我现在很容易的，我多少粉我打，很快的。那经验呐，什么都要经验呐。那些老人家传统是要用那个铁棍的，他们要那种比较传统的味道，饭块会比较烧，又好喝。现在的东西没有那种古早味，好像这2个咖啡，你这个杯跟那个塑胶杯，你冲出来不一样的。
So we have Shigeru brand from Japan, and we have Ahua in our hawker centers. I've known him since I was a young child, running around Holling Food Center when I was pretending to help out at my grandmother's store. And from Ahua, we learned that sustainability is not a new concept. It just had another term, and it was called frugality. For him, he didn't see that the upcycled tin can was a frugal innovation of a reuse model, but instead it was a mark of a coffee connoisseur. And we were very inspired by him to create a kopi cup as a cultural icon for young generation who may never use this tin can, and also to pay homage to the sustainable practice of these pioneering hawkers. But at the same time, we were horrified to see the amount of waste that's being thrown out, and we're still seeing a lot of styrofoam boxes in our hawker centers today. At the height of the pandemic, we were counting about 1,000 styrofoam boxes being used a week in an economic rice store. So scaling that up is staggering. But at the same time, we also noticed that it was popular for a reason. The stakeholders love to use it, like hawkers stack 3 on a hand, and they are able to serve really, really quickly. Consumers could use it, and see the surface, the lid as an extra surface for food. And so we thought, what if we can turn the design into a shared reuse model? And the shared reuse model is not new, but we thought if we can localize the design to fit the needs of stakeholders, it may help to nudge behavior change. And we had to design with the ability to know the measurable impact when we turn the linear cycle of a styrofoam box into the circular cycle of a reusable container. Now, because the carbon footprint of tap water in Singapore is pretty high, so we calculated that a reusable container would need about 27 users to meet the carbon footprint of a styrofoam box, and 150 users to halve the carbon footprint. So it's not quite the impact that as high as we hope we can achieve, but still one step forward, and also the container can cycle in the system. Now, as we spend a lot of time in hawker center and looking at the food on the table, we started wondering where our food comes from, and specifically where our fish comes from. And that's how I landed at the Keelong, as you can see here. So the coastal threats that Singapore faces as an island is not just the rising sea levels. Anthropogenic pollutants, marine heat waves, and other climate change factors have led to more and more frequent harmful algae blooms in our waters, threatening the fish that feeds us. And your eyes are not tricking you, that is an otter for a Buddha, a 4-sided Buddha. And I guess if you cannot control the elements that's going to influence the fish that you're harvesting, then you can only turn to the gods, right? So this is Ati's fish farm, and there are 40 over of these floating fish farms along Johor Strait, farming fish from fry to harvest that ends up in our local supermarket. And it takes about 9 months for this milkfish to be harvested. In 2014, 2015, there were a few harmful algae blooms that caused massive fish kills in the Johor Strait. And beyond the economic loss, we are seeing years of hard work by the fish farmers gone to waste overnight. Last year, we had 2 rare occurrences of the Nautilus scintillans blooms. And it was really concerning because it's not usual. And although the specific algae species was not toxic, its sheer scale can still starve the sea of oxygen and cause the suffocation of fish around them. But what really troubles me and intrigues me at the same time was the beauty of their toxicities and how much it draws people to the shores of Sentosa last year in November to frolic in the sea waves of this blooming phytoplankton, not quite realizing how they impact our food supply. And so as a design anthropologist, I shadowed the marine scientists who were monitoring these blooms in order to better understand the problem. And here they have these multi-parametric sondes that they drop into the sea in order to measure the blooms. And these sondes are placed into the sea, reaching to the seabed, and slowly lifted in order to capture a data column at every 0.1 meter depth. And you can see some of the things that they're measuring, like chlorophyll level, pH, dissolved oxygen, among others. So back in the laboratory, this is the sound of measuring blooms. Right, with the counters in hand, and with the sampled waters from the Johor Strait, what the scientists are doing is they are actually measuring the saturation of the bloom through cell density, which can range from thousands of cells to hundreds of thousands of cells per milliliter, depending on the cell size and toxicity. So fortunately, this time round, we didn't have bloom in the Johor Strait, so the fisheries were spared. It was mainly in the Singapore Strait. So I began to undertake my own citizen science experiments as I work with the marine scientists. And as I do that, culturing toxic algae species at various heat spike conditions to mimic marine heat waves, I began to understand toxic algae blooms in a more nuanced way. After all, even though certain species are toxic to marine and human life, phytoplankton in general produce half of the oxygen that we breathe in the atmosphere. So it's not quite so simple. And as I follow in the footsteps of the research scientist and the fish farmer, I encounter a spectrum of sensing, from the scientific probes to the human senses. Right? So this is the logbook of Ati. And as you can see, he's been logging for more than 10 years the weather phenomenon, the sea conditions, the sea currents around his kelong. And here he has written on one day, there was one morning with big winds, strong winds, another day where the water, oxygen level seems to be very good. And so it's this decade of logging of data that seems to give him an intuitive ability to read the oxygen level in the water, and he often plays a game with the scientists of guessing the oxygen numbers while they are capturing the data. And he's often right. Right, so this is Ati on the right of the floating fish farm, and this is Ismail, our boat captain, who is an indigenous Orang Pulau, more specifically Orang Seraya. So Pulau Seraya was eventually reclaimed as part of Jurong Island, but he has found his way back to the sea, working as a boat captain. So people like Ahua, Ati, and Ismail, they are really our island's memory keepers, right? They remind us of a time when how life was like before plastic, and how our coastal regions was full of coral reefs and seahorses, according to Ati, and how it is like to live a life on the sea, which we might have to do so one day. Right, so this wisdom became really apparent after the Fukushima tsunami, when it was observed that the water level of the tsunami waves line up curiously, as you can see in the blue line, along the red dots, which are the Shinto shrines, as though if you were to run to the shrine, you might escape the tsunami. And so it is not a coincidence. Shinto shrines are built and rebuilt over thousands of years. And so what we're seeing is really an accumulated wisdom of past generation on the resilience to deal with climate disaster. And I started wondering, where would our shrines be, if not in these floating fisheries? So if we think of design as a lens through which we can perceive complex problems like the climate crisis, then what is important to protect is the way of seeing. The thing about coastal threats is that we're often looking at it from the land towards the sea, and hence we build higher and higher seawalls against rising sea levels and getting more and more divorced from the sea. But what if we can reverse that? And that is why I have conceived Sensing Blooms Lab, which is a citizen science laboratory set on a floating fishery that is an idea still in its infancy that I'm working with a marine scientist to see how we might design the conditions to bring various stakeholders to join us in an interdisciplinary conversation, stakeholders that can include the public, citizen scientists, social scientists, designers, scientists of various disciplines, fishery farmers, as well as non-human actors, right, in order to make better climate questions about the threats that we're facing today, and also to preserve the view from the sea towards the land, and so that we might see its fraying edges and vulnerabilities. And so if I may summarize for any green comrades out there who might feel lost on how to begin, first ask, where are you going to land? Which spheres of knowledge will you be swimming within? What data assembling tools from other fields that you can gather into your design toolkit? And which feedback loops will you immerse yourself within to make sense of complex ecosystems? And lastly, how could you design the conditions for conversations between different actors across disciplines to make better climate inquiries? Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy. I'd like to invite up on stage our next speaker, Prasoon Kumar. Prasoon is the co-founder and CEO of BillionBricks, pioneering the world's first income-generating net zero home and community. I love it already. Prasoon originally founded BillionBricks in 2013 as a nonprofit, impacting the lives of over 15,000 homeless people in 9 countries. In 2020, Prasoon strategically shifted BillionBricks to become a venture-funded for-profit enterprise, extending its influence and impact as a leading sustainable affordable housing innovator. Let's put our hands together, welcoming Prasoon.
All right, hello everyone. While I was rehearsing yesterday for this presentation, my son said that I should tell you truthfully that you can do better. So I'm looking forward to doing better than what he heard me today speak. And the problem here is that I was told that I'm supposed to inspire people about climate change and what can designers do about it. But the problem in inspiring is that this is what we are expecting the climate change to do over the next several decades and years. And it's very difficult to paint a picture which is inspiring when it's continuing to go up. And we all, in some capacity or the other, are trying to do what is best. And there are some very powerful people who've spent 17 years trying to inspire, but the graph hasn't changed. And the point really is that it's easier to go and try and inspire, but very, very difficult to actually do anything or something about it. If you look at sea level change, I mean, considering the fact that this is very real for us. I mean, we live on an island nation. We can see a lot in front of us. And the expectation, if the scenario that we have today of higher emission continues, we expect sea levels to rise by about 1.1 meters by 2100. So this is a problem which is 67 years ahead of us, and we are concerned about it today, which is very, very relevant and important. And we expect at that point in time, there would be about 115 million people that will get displaced in all the coastal cities that we live in. So it's very important that we start about this today, and we start preparing for what will come in the future. But what we forget when we look into this future and worrying about climate change is pictures like this and pictures that you saw Mr. Barnes showed a little earlier of all the people who need that help today. That number stands at about 1.8 billion, and we are worried about what will happen down 115 million people that will get impacted 67 years from today. If you just look at funding, I've just put a little bit of funding about one of the largest nonprofits that work in the housing area, has an annual budget of about 2.1 billion, which is the largest in the world. One group, World Bank Group, just puts in money about 31.7 billion just on climate, which is, again, for the future that we haven't even seen is coming. And the point really is that while it's important to look at climate change and the possibilities of what it would do, it's also important to not forget that are we missing out some of the opportunities today. So what do I do? With all this knowledge, numbers is an easy part. We all like to throw them around. That's what we listen to. And I'm an architect, just like a lot of other people here, and designer as well. I would design tall buildings like these, and my slide decks will have one slide about sustainability somewhere out there, while I knew that it's really not very sustainable. I would do fancy hospitals with 5-star rooms in them and big suites, and think that I'm helping people get better health care. and I would do airports, contributing to economic development of countries. This is Mumbai Airport, a project that I worked on, where India's GDP has gone up in the last about 3 decades, about 30 times. These kind of things have helped create so much of contribution, but what we forget is the number of people who don't have access to homes and facilities has also increased in this period of time, and we are not able to catch up with our problems. So I had an idea. I should do something different and not be just a regular architect. So I quit my job, and like Joelle told you, I founded BillionBricks originally as a nonprofit. And one thing that BillionBricks wanted to do different was we were very inspired by the likes of big tech corporates like the Google and Facebook, who had the audacity to go out and say that we would organize the entire information that exists in the world, or we'll get the entire world and billions of people on our platform. We said we will also not be an organization that will help homeless, because that's easy. We will end homelessness as well. And only if we have a big, hairy goal would we do something about it, otherwise it doesn't interest us. So we went around. We built some 60 homes in Cambodia, as you can see. We built some schools in Malaysia for children who were stateless, using shipping containers, wood, sustainable materials as well. We designed temporary shelters for people who get displaced in disasters, really designed to make sure that people don't die in extreme weather conditions called weather hide. These we shipped across the world. This is in the United States, where we built these camps for people, especially in winter months. And we did a lot of work in the first 5 years. But along with the work came a lot of awards and a lot of recognition as well. But what people missed who gave us these awards and recognition is the fact that in our 5 years, all we did was to help about 15,365 people. That gives us an average of about 3,000 people, just over 3,000 people a year. This was not even close to the problem that we had taken upon ourselves to solve. And we were being celebrated in media, and we were getting all these awards for actually being a failure from what our vision was. And that's the problem that we have with a lot of these problem-solving things that we do. We do very little, but we gain a lot more. So I had to go back and really see, what do I do about this ending homelessness? So I had to think of a new idea. And I realized that it's very difficult to attract money for housing, even though we speak about it. And the reason is that housing is very expensive. It takes about $10,000 to build a decent house, and all you do for $10,000 is help about 5 people. And then it's got issues of land, and it's got issues of policies and permits and huge amount of risk. So what I did, I realized housing is nothing like butter cake that nobody wants to eat. And if I put in a little bit of climate tech on it, then it becomes more and more attractive. So Climate and Tech founded a new BillionBricks in 2020, and we could now raise more than 10 times the money that we could attract as a housing company. And we started calling ourselves a climate tech venture. I also use the word prop tech venture, depending on who I'm speaking to and who's the audience who's invited me to speak. And what we do is very, very simple. This is the kind of houses we build. This is how solar farms get built. We wrap our houses on these solar farms, really literally a cake with solar panels on top to make it look sustainable. This is the first house that we built in India. The roof has been designed such that the area of the roof is more than 2x the area of the house. And when we sell the energy from this roof, it can actually finance 100% of the cost of the house. This was very, very important because we as designers, our focus is not, as I mentioned in the beginning, on advocacy and speaking. Our focus is on execution. And execution requires money and financial models. So as an architect, I had to design financial models as part of the work that I did as well. But then as I designed this house, a lot of people started asking me, what happens to water, sewage, construction methodologies? What are you doing about more things about sustainability? So we kind of made sure we addressed all those things and kept everyone happy with a 100% rainwater system, harvesting system, sewage treatment system, a little bit of prefabrication here and there as well. And then we went on to build a couple of more houses like this in various parts. This is one of the first families that received the house.
फायद्यासाठी म्हणलं आमच्या मुली शिकवते ना मला पहिला अंधार होता ही लाईन टिकत नव्हती त्याच्यामुळे आम्ही म्हणलं सोलार करा आम्हाला सोलार दे त्याच्यामुळे दिलं ते ना तर आम्हाला आता चांगलं वाटतं.
And if you're familiar with India, there are a lot of villages that don't have very good electricity. This is the only house that has 24 hours electricity, and you would find most of the kids in the evening would gather at this house to play because this is the only safe place with a lot of electricity. But like I said, in order to execute, we realized that I had to be beyond a designer. So I had to not only design the house itself, the financing mechanism, construction, and the whole experience of living in that house as well. So that needed a lot more work to be done. So we went on to design a software that can actually design the master plan, automates it completely. So that's the tech part. What took us earlier about 40 hours would just take about 4 hours to get it done, so we can be very efficient and cost-effective. We designed financial models that pay 20% of the mortgages on behalf of people that actually live in these houses. So for example, if you buy a house for yourself in Singapore and costs $1,000 a mortgage, just imagine the developer comes in and says, I'll pay $200 on your behalf. So that's the kind of scale that we are looking at. And then we had to invent our own construction materials, make sure we are manufacturing them on our own to not only cut down the cost, but there are certain things that just don't exist in the market at all for the quality that we want to provide to the people that we help. And then, nothing sells like digital. We needed a couple of screens in the house, so we have a digital experience, and the idea is to upgrade the life of people the way they enter into the house and take pride in the fact that they've not received the cheapest house. They've not received something most basic, but aspirational, probably better than yours and mine. And therefore, now we are launching in Philippines our new next generation house, not the one that you saw first. It's called Sienna, which is now 2-story. This is generally conventional in Philippines for the places we live in. People like to see a grand staircase in their houses, so this has a staircase in it. And then it comes in as a row house as well, so it's not an individual house. We are looking to build about 1,655 of these houses in our first community that we would launch. It comes pre-done with a kitchen, with interiors as well, and the idea is, again, just to provide an upgrade, and we can cut down on costs because we'll be manufacturing a lot of the things as well. Bedrooms on the upper level. But this has not been very, very easy. As you can imagine, now I'm no longer a designer, I'm also a developer, a financier, and a marketeer and a seller as well. And that has led to me losing all these hair. And I have to carry the pressure of my goal of ending homelessness of 1.8 billion people, which is making me lose even what I'm left with. So my goal is that as I move forward, I identify a new problem to tackle in the future, which is a little bit easier, but is similar scaled at about 1.6 billion, which is to end baldness in the world. Thank you.
Last but not least, I'd like to invite on stage our last speaker for this session, Catherine Loke. Catherine is a partner at Lendlease Architects and the founding president of Singapore-based society, the Circle for Human Sustainability. As a practicing architect, as an academic, Catherine has a deep interest in how the built environment is designed, the economics of sustainability, and what motivates human behavior. In recognition of her contribution to the industry, she was awarded the Women of the Built Environment Award at the RICS Awards 2020 Southeast Asia. So now please join me in welcoming Catherine up on stage.
Today, actually, I'm going to talk about something that's beyond architecture. I actually believe in a sort of multidisciplinary or holistic approach. So as designers, actually, the first thing we ask ourselves is, what is the design brief? Because if we don't define the design brief properly, then we end up with a poor outcome. So currently, you've heard several speakers talk about net zero and carbon, etc. So this is actually dominating our design brief right now. But actually, net zero is not the only thing we should be, or carbon is not the only thing we should be talking about. In fact, we should be looking at the 9 planetary boundaries. And you can see here, actually, that climate change is actually 1 out of 9. So when we're talking about design brief and we're only focusing on climate change, we are missing all the other 8 planetary boundaries. And actually, as of April 2022, 6 of the planetary boundaries have already been exceeded, right? So we are not actually paying attention to that at all. The reason we have been exceeding planetary boundaries, or the reason we are able to, is because we actually have this magical thing called fossil fuels. This fossil fuel bonanza has actually enabled us to do a lot of things, made our lives very convenient, and just at the press of the button, we can actually do a lot of damage. But when it boils down to it, actually all energy is solar energy. And fossil fuels actually come from photosynthesis of the leaf. The leaf is actually the best solar panel in the world. And it is this ancient sunlight that is stored in the ground that we're exploiting. The ancient sunlight from leaves from 500 million years ago. And the reason why it is so super concentrated is because it's like a super soup stock that's been simmering in the pot for 500 million years. And in fact, it's so concentrated that within 7 seconds, we have already consumed what nature took an entire year to make. So actually, when we look at alternative energy sources, nothing comes close to this kind of super concentration of energy. And if you look at Singapore, actually from 1965 to now, 1965 we were reliant on oil for 99.9% of our energy needs and coal 0.1%, so that's 100%. But where are we now? In 2021, we are still 99.64% reliant on fossil fuels. And the only thing that's changed is that oil is now close to 85%, and we've switched to natural gas for electricity generation. So close to 14% natural gas, but we're still very, very much dependent on oil and natural gas. So that's why we need to pay attention to what's happening to oil and natural gas. So oil and natural gas production worldwide is already declining, and it's projected that oil, we have about 40 years left, and natural gas about 46 years left. But we're going to start feeling the decline pretty soon. You know, it's not like we'll wake up 40 years from now and go, oh, boom, it's gone, because it's going to start declining over the next decade or so. So actually, in our design brief, there is a major blind spot, right? We actually need to de-energize. We need to be designing ourselves towards a gradual stepping down of energy rather than pushing ourselves to the limit and then we drop off the cliff and then all of us are going to get hurt. So as designers, we really need to put into our design brief how we're going to step down gradually in a controlled way so that we can have a nice soft landing. And apart from energy, actually, we are almost entirely reliant on oil. Oil is actually the seats you're sitting on, right? It's synthetic fabric, so that's made from oil. And everything we touch and see, and like this clicker here is made from plastic. And actually, even the alternative energy sources like solar panels and wind turbines also reliant on oil for us to make. Right, so life is going to change significantly, and as designers, the choice of materials we have available is also going to change significantly. And also with the push for electrification, one of the main minerals that we need is copper. So anything that's electrified needs copper. And if you look at this graph here, the existing supply of copper is going down, and the mining companies are planning to increase production. But it's also on a downward trajectory. And actually, this is the demand line. So the demand line actually diverges from the supply line quite significantly. So actually, the current push for net zero and pushing for us to put solar panels everywhere, etc., is actually creating a demand for minerals that our mines actually cannot meet. And it's also accelerating the depletion of oil because we need oil to power the machines that do the mining and the processing. And one more bit of information here is that experts are actually projecting that the cost of solar and wind is actually going to go up as the minerals start depleting as well. So these are sort of important things as designers that we need to pay attention to. And of course, you look at this giant hole on the left side of the screen. I mean, why are we doing this? It's actually biodiversity loss is one of the planetary boundaries that we are neglecting. If we still want our mobile phones, etc., then this is what we're actually doing to the planet. So I've only told you about copper, but there are a whole string of other minerals as well. Just to name a few: nickel, lithium, cobalt, graphite. I can go on. Your mobile phone actually takes about 60 different metals to make. So we are actually mining these giant holes to make these things. Okay, so typically for my talks, the first half is the bad news, then the second half is the good news. So by now you probably think I'm some kind of a doomsday prophet, right? Telling you the world's going to end. So now I'll try and give you some good news. So on the left, this one cartoon that I loved watching when I was a kid, the Jetsons. How do we live within planetary boundaries? Are we going to have some kind of Jetsons future where technology is going to save us, we're going to have flying cars and robots to do all our work? Or are we going to actually go back to the Stone Age? Flintstones was also one of the favorite cartoons that I watched. So are we going to go super high-tech, or are we going to go back to the Stone Age? Well, actually, it's neither. It's probably a combination of both, right? We will use the materials that we have available. We will apply the technology that we have, but it will be in a different way from what we imagine now. So what can that be? So this is where the Circle for Human Sustainability comes in. We actually take Kate Raworth's donut that Joelle mentioned this morning as quite a good conceptual framework in terms of providing this idea that there's an ecological ceiling, and then that there's the inner ring being the social foundation. So we find this actually a very good foundation for how we're going to carry through our vision. But is this ecological ceiling and this social foundation actually two different things? Because in this diagram, it seems to be two different things, right? One is the planetary boundary limit, and then the inner ring seems to be something else. So actually, there is a way to link the two conceptually. So when we talk about economics, right, this is something I've been sort of pondering for the last few years. In terms of how we link these two, is social foundation just about doing social work and helping the poor, or what actually is it? So to my mind, actually, I find that it's quite useful to think about it in terms of a balance between the yin and yang. So our current economic system is actually yang dominant. We're so aggressively pursuing money, and we're motivated by self-interest, and also we are pushing for GDP growth. But without GDP growth, does that mean that we all become poor and there's recession, lose our jobs? Then what's going to happen? So that's where the yin side of the equation comes in, where we actually, humans are also motivated by self-transcendence. We actually do a lot of things not for money, but for the sake of caring for somebody else, for our own family, for our own friends, our own community. So that actually already exists. So how do we actually marry the two? So this is where I was thinking that during COVID as well, we learned how there are certain professions that are actually valuable to us, but we pay them very low, right? The low-wage workers, the cleaners, people doing farming now also earning less, right? So maybe these are actually not low-wage work, but they're actually priceless occupations. And if we had an integrated lifestyle where, you know, some of the time we work in the conventional economy and some of the time we work in the social economy, then we ourselves as individuals become more integrated as well. And the priceless occupations could actually be shared amongst the communities. So we could actually be rostered to do cleaning, do farming, etc. And that gives us physical exercise as well. Then the government, of course, can step in to try to channel some revenue towards social economy as well. And the way that revenue can be raised is through a COE-like mechanism, which already exists for cars, but we could also apply a COE on limited resources, for example, air conditioning. If it's too expensive or more expensive to have air-conditioned buildings, then developers will tell us to design for natural ventilation. And also things like GST. Right now we're taxing goods and services. Maybe we should tax goods and not services so that goods become more expensive to buy and then it's cheaper to repair them. And then government can channel this revenue to also support the social economy and also create a system where people can have access to basic necessities either by buying or by participating in the social economy. So if you lose your job in a conventional economy, you're not totally helpless and without access to food or shelter. You could also participate in the social economy and gain access to basic necessities that way. And the balance can shift to suit personal circumstance. So actually, I'm experimenting it on myself right now. So 5 days a week, I still work in my day job, still earning money to pay bills. But on the weekends, I'm actually at a permaculture garden where I volunteer and I get the produce. And Sunday nights, I cook my meal. My family meal is actually from the produce from the farm that I go volunteer at every weekend. And of course, apart from that, money can also be channeled towards rehabilitating damaged environments. So I mentioned that I go to a permaculture garden, and actually this slide was quite difficult. It's just one sentence, but it was a very difficult slide for me to do because it's very difficult to explain what permaculture is. You actually need to experience it. So in these few minutes, I'll attempt to just show you a little bit on what permaculture can do. But I kind of stumbled upon it last year, and for me it was really mind-blowing because I'd been pondering these 9 planetary boundaries for ages. Even before Kate Raworth's donut, I was looking at the 9 planetary boundaries and going, oh my God, you know, like the problem seems so huge and so complex. And actually, when you look at something that's, when you look at something that's circular, if you look around the circumference is bigger and bigger as you get further and further away from the center. But if you start from the center, then the picture or the problem is a lot smaller. So what I discovered with permaculture is that instead of dealing with all the symptoms, you know, on the periphery of this diagram, permaculture goes straight to the center, and that's why, for me, it's able to address all 9 planetary boundaries in one hit, and in very simple ways. So for example, climate change is caused by carbon, and healthy soil actually sequesters carbon. And then we can also reduce methane emissions by aerobic composting. And fresh water, because healthy soil also absorbs moisture and helps to filter water. And then the bottom part of the 9 planetary boundaries is nitrogen and phosphorus pollution, which is actually the main cause of that is our industrial agriculture using the use of fertilizers and pesticides. So in permaculture, we don't use fertilizers, nor do we use pesticides. So that takes care of the nitrogen and phosphorus pollution. And also novel entities. Today, we're actually pumping a lot of chemicals into the environment all the time. Even your toiletries, whatever perfume, shower, gel, whatever, everything that we use, we're pumping chemicals all the time. So in permaculture, we don't use any chemicals, so that sorts that out. Then in terms of land system change, if we're able to grow more food in urban environments, then actually it takes the pressure off rural land. And with that, we can actually return some of that land back to nature so that we can rehabilitate biodiversity. And using permaculture, we can even increase biodiversity in urban areas. So this is the outer ring of Kate Raworth's planetary, of the ecological ceiling. And then what about the inner ring? So again, using permaculture, we can strengthen social foundations. We can have numerous farms which will become community focal points. And actually, we will significantly reduce the energy trail of all the packaging and stuff. And polycentric networks also build resilience. So the best way is to show you what we're doing. In terms of food security, is it true that we only have 1% of land? Well, actually, this is not a natural limit. This is a limit that we've imposed on ourselves. So this is the garden that I go to. And then I'll just share with you a video where you can actually live within planetary boundaries and have fun as well. So this is a bamboo pergola that we have constructed. And this is the design. The model is made from bamboo that is sourced on site. So here are the volunteers clearing the site and harvesting the bamboo, which is just near the car park. And we have a farm-to-table experience as well, because this is a mulberry leaf pesto, which is harvested from the farm. And then it was actually raining, but we didn't care. We went back out and worked in the rain. And you can see there are little kids there as well, people of all ages and sizes. And the design is intentionally such that it can be built by untrained people. And then we're doing composting at the bottom to prepare the planters to plant the growing plants. Okay, so now that we've sorted out the design brief, then how do we approach design? What I've discovered is we shouldn't be too prescriptive, and we should actually give people blank slates so that communities can actually come together and figure things out themselves. So basically, we need to design with our heads. We use our rational minds, and we calculate things, and we can do simulations and things. But we also need to design with our heart, which is to do with wellness. But the one thing that's missing right now is designing with our hands. So our hands are actually important for our brain development, which is missing right now. And so to be sustainable, we actually need all three to design with our head, heart, and hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I hope everyone had a great time listening to the three presenters. It was really very insightful. I think what was evident today was that ours would not only be a hard truths session, and we talked about this during our panel discussions, panel preps. It was also a act now session, right? The call to action is very clear across all of your work. And even though we may not be super inspirational, I think there's something we can be stubbornly optimistic about, whether it's Prasoon trying to scale up your social housing projects, Wendy designing for, understanding the data that's coming through from ocean acidification and all the changes that's happening, as well as Catherine using permaculture as a starting point or the solution for redesigning systems and painting a parallel systems. And there are many compelling frameworks that we've talked about today, planetary boundaries, regenerated design, and also a bit about circular economy, helping us rethink fundamentally about how we view sustainability, and not just through the lens of carbon. I guess our focus for the panel today is this: what is the role of the design community? Designers, business people who are in design, consumers of design as well, in how we shape our future more sustainably and more practically. And maybe I'll start this off with Wendy, right? You talked about, creating conditions for conversations to happen between the stakeholders. What makes a designer a better convener than others?
Well, I'm not sure if a designer is necessarily a better convener, but I do think that the design skills is no longer enough. I think we need skills from other disciplines. In a way, I see myself more as a design anthropologist, mixing the creative skills of a designer and the critical lens from social sciences in order to make sense of very complex problems. So what Catherine and you were sharing about the planetary boundaries, I mean, hanging out with the marine scientists and the fishery farmers allow me to make sense a bit of the feedback loops, right? We see the phosphorus and the nitrogen from the fertilizer runoff, and we can connect that to the nourishing of the harmful algae blooms that in fact threaten our fish and then causing food supply to be decimated and affordability of food to go down. And so we can really make those connections across those pillars, and they're not siloed. And I think the ability of an interdisciplinary designer who can also borrow tools from the social sciences allow you to draw those dots and connect the dots. Yeah,
and something you talked about through during our prep as well, right? The data actually shows up interesting findings. What do you find most surprising of all the findings that you've seen?
So we always think that a shared reuse system is better, but you really have to do the life cycle analysis to understand how it will work on a local basis. And it's really difficult to pitch ideas if you don't have the data. So with the life cycle analysis of the styrofoam container, for example, and a reusable container, we were doing an exhibition and we actually invited our MP of our precinct down. And we sat down, we presented it to him, and he took out his phone and we started calculating and really looking at the numbers to understand, if he wants to support us to make a reuse model within our neighborhood coffee shop, what is the kind of impact we can really see? And after doing all the calculation, he was like, this impact is still not enough for me to push for this. And that's kind of like sometimes a struggle that you might face, but I think it's still critical that I had the data to even have that conversation with him, to be able to talk to policymakers.
Yeah, I think that's really important of, having those conversations that are data and evidence driven, right? Rather than, something that you thought about. I'll just turn my attention to Prasoon now. We talked about the design process and how you engage with stakeholders. Share with us, what is most surprising for you in your journey so far, right, from a design perspective?
I think the most surprising aspect is that we know, as designers, we know all the tools, we know what to do. I think we learn the right things in school. But I think applying them in real life is very, very hard. Also, I think there are maybe two schools of thoughts on what we look at them and the way we apply. And I'll give you a couple of examples, right? So we do talk about empathizing with the user a lot in design. And that could be various levels of stakeholders, customers that we are building for. But over the years, what I've learned is that the real person we need to empathize is with ourselves. Our users and stakeholders are not really different from us. And especially when we work with poorer communities like what we do, we tend to think that we need to go and learn what their lifestyle is, how they live, or how they would use our products or our houses. But in reality, today, people are all the same. They have similar aspirations. Most people have access to internet, and that's what they desire. And all we have to see is what kind of life we want to live. And that's would be pretty close to the life that most people would want to live as well. I mean, of course, there are exceptions. The second, I think, is an example is on inclusivity, right? That's also a buzzword that all designers like to speak a lot about, inclusivity as well. And I think when we talk about inclusivity, we generally look at them from a perspective, in most cases, with people with special needs. How can design be inclusive for them? But I think what we miss out is that most products and services that we have are being used by a very few of us, which within the world population are about 1 billion people or 1.2 billion who are wealthy enough to use those. And inclusivity excludes the remaining people who are not part of our products and parcels. So before coming, I was doing a lot of preparation for this, this panel discussion. And some of the conversations I was hearing, people were talking about when we design, our products get used by everyone, or they are benefiting everyone. But in reality, it's very few who are benefiting, and we should not generalize for everyone. And I think these are some things that we as designers should question, because like I said, we have the tools, but we just need to know how to apply them well.
And that's, I thought about this question when you were presenting that housing project in Philippines, and you mentioned, hey, it's got a grand staircase because everyone wants that. And, it's actually one of those things that's very aspirational, right, for a lot of us who live in a flat or in an apartment, having a house with a staircase. Was that also something that came out from those, in a way, your self-empathy?
Yeah, totally. I questioned the staircase for the longest time because it's not a cheap thing to build. Oftentimes, the places where we build land is generally easily available and stuff. And I even thought that because in Philippines there's a lot of flooding and environmental issues, maybe that's the reason they want to be on the upper level and protect the lower floor. But it's really just the grandeur of the staircase. And also in small houses, I think the privacy helps, being upstairs, the bedrooms being there. The houses, the images that you showed, I didn't describe in detail, are very small. They're about 21 square meter in each area. So for a lot of us, they're the size of our bedroom. On one level. So they're very small, so staircase takes quite a bit of area. And I think that's what makes BillionBricks a little bit unique. We give to our customers what they want. We don't question their intent. We don't think that what we as designers want, they should have access to. And we are very giving in this case, and in most of the things as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prasoon. And now for Catherine. We heard about permaculture, and I think the whole concept can be very easily reduced to kind of two things. One is very idealistic, or two, is it just farming, right? And it's so different from our lives that we live today. But I really like the balance that you struck with the notion of balanced economy. Can you share with us, what is your theory of change here? How do you see it being operationalized in your own practice and also being operationalized at scale?
Well, we often hear this saying that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. So actually, the way to everybody's heart is through their stomach. So Singaporeans are known as foodies, and we are focused very much on the taste of the food, and we often not aware or don't even question where it comes from. I mean, I've given other talks, one called How to Make Chicken Rice, which is on our website, which you can have a look at, where I trace the energy trail of chicken rice. In terms of, I always think of how to simplify. We can look at the problem and think it's super, super complex and we need lots of money and lots of effort, but actually it all boils down to where we get our food from. In a city, we are so far removed from our food source that we tell our children to study hard, go to school, go to university, get a job, earn lots of money. At the end of the day, it's to buy food. But if your food is just grown there, then you can also get food that way. You can do that convoluted way to get food, but you can also do a very direct way to get food. So to me, actually, the best starting point is to talk to people about food, which is what we do actually at the Mad Garden at Winstead, where we just had our urban farm experience yesterday. We do it once a month, where people come and we take them on a tour of the garden, and after that they get to taste the food. And that is what gets them. The moment they taste the food, that's what gets them that this is something they can do.
So you did a life cycle assessment for chicken rice.
Sorry?
Yeah, I mean, tracing the energy trail,
That was a life cycle, yes, for chicken rice, yes, that's right.
Yes. Back to Wendy, and I'll also link this to, the first question that came out from the pigeonhole. You alluded to frugal innovation in your work. Can you share a little bit more about that and how it relates to designing for sustainable futures? That's part one. Part two is, how is the response on Kopi Cup?
Well, I'm really happy to see that question. If you would like to support us, you can go to our website. We are still raising funds in order to produce it. We're not in super big of a rush, because for us it's also more of a message that we want to send out, that we do have pioneering ideas that are from our earlier generation, and sustainability doesn't necessarily come from the West, or it's a new concept, so to speak. But on frugal innovation, I thought it was interesting also when we heard the keynote speech today of Ban San, that it makes a difference when you have innovations that has a very low entry barrier, a low cost barrier, because it allows for scaling across the global south, beyond Singapore, whereas most of the countries are going to deal with the impact of climate change. I think in the fish farm that I visited, for example, in Artie's Fish Farm, and we are seeing right now actually a slow phasing out of all these fish farms. And I think in the next 10 years, we might not see those traditional ones anymore. And we're transiting to more tech-based fish farms. But in Artie's farm, what I noticed was that how he has cleverly devised a way in which the nets, because the fish has to transfer from nets to nets, at least 5 to 6 times as they get bigger and bigger, and it gets into a net with a different weave size. And he has devised a way of just very cleverly lowering the net so that the fish will swim over and then he'll pull it up again. So it's almost like requiring very little labor to do that. He's rearing herbivorous fish, milkfish, which is also feeding on the phytoplankton. So the sea is nourishing the fish as it could also kill the fish. So I think it is also about his ability to read the sea. At the same time, he's taking leftover from the food products from the bakery industry and feeding the fishes as well. So he's already connecting industries in that way. And there's really very, very little waste involved in that system. Yeah, and I thought that was a really good example of frugal innovation as well. And I think one thing to note is that And just like what Catherine is sharing about farming, is that when you look at these sites, it really goes beyond being a fish farm. It's also a site for citizen science experiments. It's also a site to understand habitat, floating habitat on the sea. For instance, will you be comfortable living on the sea if you have 4 to 6 meter long saltwater crocodiles swimming up to you? And that's a very, very frequent sight on the Johor Strait, right? So how do you live with the other non-human species that's around us? It's other things that we can learn.
Yeah. And I like how you describe frugal innovation, because essentially it sounded like a designer at work. Essentially, they were trying to simplify what were the processes, how do you make it you know, in the most economical way as possible with the resources that you have, right?
Yeah, right.
I don't know, Catherine, would you like to kind of add to that as well? Because I think in essence, what you are trying to promote, and also Prasoon, what you're trying to promote is essentially a manifestation of frugal innovation, but packaged slightly differently.
Yeah, I like to call it actually simplification. I mean, I like frugal innovation in what it does, but maybe the word frugal might you know, make people feel like they're giving up something. But I'd rather look at it in terms of simplification, like when you simplify your life and you connect with the sources of your, you know, food and everything else, and also when you connect with the ecosystem and the creatures that live around you, your life is enriched in a different way. So while it can be frugal in the money sense, oh, by the way, that bamboo project cost us less than $10 because the, you know, everything was sourced from the site, and we only bought the plastic ties to tie the bamboo pieces together, and I bought the laksa noodles from NTUC Fair Price to add to the mulberry leaves that I used to cook the thing. So with just less than $10, we all had a great time, and we built something, and there was hardly any money involved, you know. So this idea that we need money or need to push for growth in order to deliver well-being is something that we need to move away from, and it doesn't mean that we're all going to be poor and we're going to suffer, because our lives are going to be enriched in other ways.
On money, now Prasoon, the question here for you is, how do you balance the commercial gains for investors and partners versus the benefits to the actual end users? And on the money side, who's actually paying for these houses?
Sorry, what's the second part?
Who's paying for these houses?
Oh. So I think the second part is easy. The homeowners pay for the houses. It's really, again, like I said, empathize with yourself. How we go to a bank and we get mortgages. So our homeowners also go to a bank, but they cannot go to a commercial bank because they are too risky. So they go to a government bank and they get financing from there. And our goal of putting 20% of that mortgage in their pocket is that people who don't qualify for that government loan today and are just below that 20% mark can now also qualify. So we think a very large population in the areas we work would now be able to access homes because of that mortgages that we provide. In terms of balancing the commercial gains for investors and between the end users, so investors are very, very powerful. so they drive a lot of the work that we do. But I think we are committed to the fact that we have to provide a good product in the end, and the homeowner needs to like that product. So I think it's not a very difficult balance, because we don't have to overcome what we are giving as a product to the homeowner. But I must say that we've been very, very fortunate that the investors that we have believe in what BillionBricks is pushing through, and that I think is very, very important, what in some people would call the quality of money. And at least until now, I think even though I at times may digress or feel that, okay, investors are pushing me towards a direction, they do tell me that, okay, what is the mission that we are on? So I think that's very, very fortunate for us. But I must say that the difficult part for us has been actually the partners. And we have to work with financiers on the project. We have to work with other developers. And there we find that when they see this extra money that we are giving as mortgages to people, they become greedy. Even though we promise them market rate returns on the investments they would do, but most financiers are today designed not to get the financial returns they expect, but to maximize them. So if they see the profits in the project can be larger, they don't want that to go to the homeowners, they want that to come to us. So that is a very, very difficult struggle for us.
So do you actually say that here's the minimum that goes to the homeowner? How does the finances break down?
So they look at our financial model, so we can't hide much from them. But we have a two-pronged strategy on it. I mean, today we are very small, so we give in a lot. We think once we become big and we have some clout, then we'll flex our muscles too. And the second is that we think that the innovation that we are doing, I talked to you about in terms of design, construction, the whole experience part, we think we'll create a lot more value, financial value, which will make these projects much more profitable. So if a financier is looking for X return, what we are telling them in 5 years, we'll give you actually X plus 2. So we are trying to show them an upside, but it's really a stakeholder management thing. It's really a business call. Not an easy thing, but I think we are committed to it.
Thank you so much, Prasoon. Wendy, a couple of questions for you with regards to design. Actually, two kind of related questions. One is, do you think design education needs to evolve, and how? And the second one is, can you give us some advice on how designers can better handle data and data storytelling? I feel like they're kind of almost linked there. Yeah.
In a way, yes, I definitely think design needs to evolve. I've always had one foot in the academic institution teaching design and another foot running my practice. So it's something that is very, very close to my heart. And I just came back from my postgrad research and I intentionally chose a course that was not taught by designers. And I really think that we need people from other professions in the design classroom, the marine scientists, the fish farmer, right, and the social scientists that can teach us different types of methodology. In fact, our design toolkit is borrowed from anthropologists and their ethnography methods, right? And it's just that we turn it into a problem-solving toolkit. But I think we need to also deepen our knowledge of the social sciences to understand their critical way of thinking. And that connects back to sort of the data and the storytelling, and which is, the more data assembling tools that you can bring to your design toolkit, the more you're able to make sense of the complexity. So when I was able to culture my own toxic algae, set it at different temperature heights and see how they perform with do they survive, do they flourish, do they die with the marine heat waves, I was then able to actually say something about all these news stories that I hear about marine heat waves in the papers. And I think that is critical. So, and in that sense, then we are no longer designers, we are interdisciplinary designers. And that's very different from multidisciplinary design team, which is about pulling people from different disciplines together, but they're still doing what they are strong at. And I think being an interdisciplinary designer requires you to actually speak the language of other fields in order to be able to mediate and translate between those fields in order to make conditions for conversations, as well as to negotiate for different voices to come to the table. Right, so these translating, mediating, and negotiating would actually become the new action of an interdisciplinary designer.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I think that's a really powerful takeaway there. We are almost at time, but I have two questions that I really want to ask Catherine and Prasoon as kind of my last questions to each of you. Catherine, as a parting word to the audience, could you share a little bit more about, de-energizing versus decarbonizing? How should we move forward from here?
Okay, so when you de-energize, you will also automatically decarbonize. But if you decarbonize, you won't automatically de-energize. Because in the decarbonization conversation right now, we are kind of also bargaining with ourselves, imagining that we can continue living as we do, and just find alternative sources of energy that are carbon neutral, and then that solves our problem. But as you have seen with the mineral realities, we still need to make devices to generate that energy. So actually, it can't be. The other thing is that we also want to pay other countries to sequester the carbon for us, and we also think we can invent machines to absorb the carbon, right? Which, as you have seen my slide, showing the leaves on the right side, that because fossil fuels are such a dense energy source that nature took 500 million years to produce, to make, it's so dense that it's impossible for us to sequester the carbon we emit when we burn it and we release the carbon. In 7 seconds, it took 1 year to be made. So how are we going to sequester that? In 7 seconds, so it's really impossible. So it's a pipe dream. So to de-energize is really looking at our lifestyle, If you remember that graph showing our energy consumption, if you take some time, say mid-1980s, Singapore population was half of what it is today. But the energy consumption compared to now was only 1/6 or 1/7. So our population doubled from 1985 till now, but our energy consumption increased 6 to 7 times. But did our lives change that much? I mean, those of you who remember what it was like in 1985, actually, I don't remember my life being really that different, right? So we're actually wasting a lot of energy right now.
That's a call to action right
yes,
there.
Yes,
right?
And that we can do it.
My last question for you and for you, Prasoon, is what was the push that made you quit your job to start from scratch with BillionBricks? What were the main challenges? And I guess, you know, to kind of leave our audience with a bit of an inspirational note, what drove you?
I refrain from answering this question because I've had people in the past that have also quit their job, and it's definitely not recommended. The challenge, I think you know that I've lost my hair, so I think that's the biggest challenge, and I really, it pains me every time I think about it. But I think the push was really conversations like this. I mean, I would speak a lot in conferences about what's the right thing to do, what is designers' contribution, architects' contribution. Housing is a subject which a lot of architects believe in, urban planners believe in, talk about it. And at one point I became tired of speaking about what to do. I'm like, why do we keep speaking about it when no one's done it? Can we really do it? Can this actually be applied, all the theories that I go in and speak in these conversations? So I took that as a challenge for myself and quit my job to say, okay, can I really solve this problem of housing in a way not been done before? And is it possible to walk the talk? And for some reason, I've survived many, many years doing it. But I must say that it's not something which is really replicable. I think the problems that we face in the world, I think, are too large. And I think at individual level, it's very, very difficult to solve them. But I think what's more important is the human spirit to kind of question them and move forward and really be genuine in how we want to make a difference. I think we have to be truthful inside us and really work with the calling.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prasoon. And indeed, that's something we talk about a lot, right? You know, how do we be truthful to ourselves? How do we, even in our own stations in life, in the jobs that we have, challenge the agenda, challenge our current systems and ways of working? And thank you very much. A round of applause for our panel. Maybe I'll just hold you back a little bit. I'll spend just the next couple of minutes summing up, you know, our session today. You know, we started the session earlier with a call to rethink so that we can redefine and redesign our system. Rethink what sustainability encompasses, you know, and that has changed, hopefully, for the rest of you all. I've definitely learned a lot from the presentations today, beyond carbon and climate change and through the lens of planetary boundaries and the donut. And as evident from all the presentations, the speakers' work seek to concurrently address both the outer as well as the inner ring, both the ecological ceiling as well as the social foundation, whether it's adopting renewable energy, understanding the health of our oceans and soils, and meeting people's needs and aspirations in a dignified way, in an elegant way, and a very practical way. I'm sure you have your own takeaways, and you know, I'd love to compare notes later on during our breaks. But here's mine. You know, the first takeaway for me was really the interconnectedness, that planetary health and our own health are interconnected and have complementary agendas for thriving. If we make sure that our planet is healthy, we in turn will be healthy. Our society and economy are embedded in nature, and we need to recognize what that is there that is at breaking point. And my second takeaway is this: nurture human nature, whether it's through empathy, whether it's through hands-on work, whether it's through talking to Ati and, you know, Ahua, you know, folks in the Kelong, and harness the power of the community. I think that's really, really important. Across all the projects, you hear from disaster relief housing, creating conversations, conditions for conversations. Sometimes it's less tech. You realize that I'm holding a piece of paper here, less tech, more touch, more human smarts, more human creativity. And the last takeaway for me is really, how do we design a better way of life at scale? How do we rethink our growth model? How might we create conditions for human flourishing? How might we work across silos, that interdisciplinary approach, so that we can galvanize greater outcomes? And how might we value that diversity so that we can really allow for smaller, slower, and enough? And we've seen some great examples today. Your move next. You can make a better world by design. Thank you.